We are going to continue. We are travelling through the book of Matthew today, and we have the shortest passage of all time, but really intriguing. I think this week more than ever, I've just found myself totally intrigued by this passage and what it actually means. It's very short, but there's a lot of depth there. So here it is, Matthew chapter 10, beginning at verse 40. Anyone who receives you, this is Jesus talking to his disciples, he's just sending them out to share the good news. Anyone who receives you receives me, and anyone who receives me receives the Father who sent me. If you receive a prophet as one who speaks for God, you'll be given the same reward as a prophet. And if you receive a righteous person because of their righteousness, you will be given a reward like theirs. And if you give even a cup of cold water to one of the least of my followers, you will surely be rewarded. I'm going to start with this first part of the passage, that if, someone receives someone who is a follower of Christ, then it's like they're receiving Jesus themselves. And I think there's this real incredible image here, that if you're a follower of Jesus, and you are in the presence of someone else, they get to encounter Jesus. Now, in traditions like Catholicism, Anglicanism, there's a word that's often used called sacraments. And a sacrament is an opportunity to encounter Jesus in an everyday event. And one of the sacraments is communion, where you have wine and bread, and we say this is a chance to encounter Jesus in the everyday. And then when someone gets baptised, they're in water, an everyday item, and this is an opportunity to encounter Jesus. But here Jesus is kind of saying this is like a sacramental moment. When you are in the presence of someone else, it is an opportunity to encounter Jesus. I was thinking of this and feeling quite confronted. I'm not sure that every time someone encounters me, they feel like they've encountered Jesus. Perhaps quite the opposite. Years ago I heard there was a priest in Christchurch, some of you may know him, Spanky Moore, he's now in Nelson, and he talked about, and I think I've told this story here quite recently, but I can't remember my sermons, so you can't, so I'm going to retell it. He talked about this man who met a student who was an atheist, and he said to him, come and live with me for 6 months and then tell me at the end of it if you're still an atheist. And I thought of that and I was like, wow, imagine someone coming and living with me for 6 months. Would they even believe there's a God at the end of it? But I thought long and hard, and I was, here I am in this role. Surely I can do better than that. And so I did actually think, and I do remember there have actually been moments in my life where I've become friends with someone, often through music. I did music in orchestras for years. And then someone would say, can I come to your church with you? And so I'd be like, yes. I remember being able to baptise a friend through that. And other times I remember someone saying, it was two people who weren't Christians, one of them said to me, we were talking about you. And we were saying that something strange happens when we talk to you. People feel this encounter. And I think it doesn't happen very often, but here's this opportunity that Jesus talks about. When people encounter you, there's an opportunity for them to encounter Jesus. I was pondering this and I thought of something really strange that often happens to me when I go to the supermarket. Now, I'm going to name this, you've probably noticed it. My resting face isn't pleasant. I always perpetually have an angry look on my face. And this is what I imagine I look like when I'm going through the supermarket. I don't love the supermarket. But every so often I glance and there's a small child just beaming at me and always takes me by surprise. And then I'm like, remember to smile. And they're looking at me and it's almost like they're looking through me. Has anyone ever had this happen? Nouwen at 9 o'clock, or is it just me? I see those hands. Bless you, sister. But after a while of this weird stuff happening, I was like, maybe they see Jesus. They're still little, their vision isn't clouded, or maybe they're just happy children. I don't know. But there's this thing, and this is what Jesus is talking about. When we're relating to people, this thing can happen where people can encounter Jesus, and we can encounter Jesus in those people. And how does this happen? I'm really interested that the first thing Jesus does to his disciples is just send them out vulnerable. They have to find somewhere to live, to stay, someone to talk to. I think so often you think of Christians, they go on their missions trips and they've already booked their hotels, they've got it all sorted, and then they're there to rescue and to save the people that they go to visit. We've got everything we have to offer. Here Jesus just flips that script. You have one thing to offer, and that's the presence of Jesus within you. And all the rest they give you. It's a two-way relationship. And so here, Jesus' followers are not to stand on street corners with placards, full of their view of the truth, looking down their noses at people, thinking they have everything to offer. It's this reciprocal relationship. Go into someone's house, and there you share each what you have. And then what is it that you're sharing? It reminds me actually of last week I mentioned Rowan Williams in his book Christ on Trial. But Rowan Williams has a thought that he comes back to often. What is it that we are sharing when we're gathering together? And how do we do this? How do we end up sharing Jesus? Rowan Williams says we receive our identity from Jesus. This isn't something we have to strive for. This isn't something we have to curate. This isn't something we have to add on to our lives. I'm going to be like Jesus. We receive this identity to be like Jesus. So we don't have to fake it when we go into a room and think, are people going to notice how good I am, how kind I am? Jesus has given us an identity. Our culture doesn't understand this. Our culture says, look within yourself, discover yourself, create yourself. And Jesus says, follow me and receive yourself. So this is what we do, and then we go out into the world. So I was pondering this, and I was like, I've been a follower of Jesus since I was 3 years old. And this was because my sister, who was 5, told me that if I wasn't a Christian, I was going to hell. And so started a long journey of anxiety about death. An immense fear of that finally as an adult I could unpack and go, she was 5. And I think, I'm wrestling with this. I know that every time someone encounters me, they're not like, wow, Jesus, that was amazing at all. And I think, particularly in this role, I just spent a lot of time suppressing things, get rid of the nasty side, don't put that on display. It becomes kind of a performance. I have to be nice. And then every so often the guard comes down and, you're like, oops, maybe I shouldn't have said this. So how does this work? We receive this identity from Jesus, and then when we encounter other people, they're supposed to see Jesus in us, but the reality doesn't feel like that. I think Paul, when he's writing his letters to the early churches, he wrestles with this kind of thing. We've received this incredible gift from God, but also, what else do we have to do? I'm going to read to you from the book of Romans, and it's in the Message translation, because I find Romans wordy and hard to understand. So here it is. So that's just a wee, if you ever find it the same, you're in good company, or bad company. Anyway, this is Romans chapter 6. You must not give sin a vote in the way you conduct your lives. Don't give it the time of day. Don't even run little errands that are connected with that old way of life. Throw yourselves wholeheartedly and full time. Remember, you've been raised from the dead into God's way of doing things. Sin can't tell you how to live. After all, you're not living under that old tyranny any longer. You're living in the freedom of God. What is true freedom? So since we're out from under the old tyranny, does that mean we can live any old way we want? Since we're free in the freedom of God, can we do anything that comes to mind? Hardly. You know well enough from your own experience that there are some acts of so-called freedom that destroy freedom. Offer yourselves to sin, for instance, and it's your last free act. But offer yourself to the ways of God, and the freedom never quits. All your lives you've let sin tell you what to do, but thank God you've started listening to a new master, one whose commands set you free to live openly in his freedom. I'm using this freedom language because it's easy to picture. You can readily recall, can't you, how at one time, the more you did just what you felt like doing, not caring about others, not caring about God, the worse your life became and the less freedom you had. And how much different is it now as you live in God's freedom, your lives healed and expansive in holiness? As long as you did what you felt like doing, ignoring God, you didn't have to bother with right thinking or right living or right anything for that matter. But do you call that a free life? What did you get out of it? Nothing you're proud of now. Where did it get you? A dead end. But now that you've found you don't have to listen to sin tell you what to do, and have discovered the delight of listening to God telling you, what a surprise, a whole healed, put together life right now, with more and more in life on the way. Work hard for sin your whole life, and your pension is death. But God's gift is real life, eternal life, delivered by Jesus, our Master. Here there's a picture of working. Don't give sin the time of day. Don't, even look at it. Don't give it anything. Instead, listen to God. This is about working. So on the one hand, we're hearing, you're given a new identity from God. And on the other hand, Paul's like, you've got to work for that identity. So how does this work? Well, there's a really great theologian who really tries to figure out what does this look like in practice. So I want to have a look at his work for a little bit. His name is Henri Nouwen. I probably haven't said that right. I've tried to find it online in practice. It's still embarrassing. Anyway, he wrote a book in 1975 called Reaching Out, the Three Movements of the Spiritual Life. And I'm stunned that this is 1975, his work. 1975, in people's homes, the technology on offer was the radio, a record player, maybe a tape deck. Anyone? 1975? A television and a landline phone. Probably in a public place where everyone in your family can listen to your whole conversation. This is technology. And then he writes, how do you find God? How do you move into a different way of being? And he makes a few points. Spiritual growth is about transformation. To be like Jesus, it's a process of transformation. And Christian maturity is not measured by the things our world looks at. It's not measured by efficiency, influence, or success, but by increasing freedom to love. So if we go right back to this passage that we read in Matthew, here's Jesus talking about going to people and being received, and then also of people having hospitality and offering that to other people. So how do we get to that point? That we're full of God's love, that we can offer hospitality. And here it is. Christian maturity is marked by a growing freedom to love other people. So in this book, he talks about three movements that are interconnected. They're like a cycle that we keep going through. I found them really interesting and really helpful probably for our current era. First one he talks about is moving from loneliness to solitude. And this is about healing our relationship with ourselves. Second thing is moving from hostility to hospitality, where we learn to heal our relationship with others. And then finally moving from illusion to prayer, which is healing our relationship to God. So I'm going to look at each of these three things in turn. What he says about them I found incredibly profound. Moving from loneliness to solitude. He talks about, loneliness isn't simply physical isolation. It's an inner emptiness characterised by anxiety, restlessness, and the desperate need for affirmation. Isn't that the story of social media? The story of our world, the currency that we are raising children in. anxiety, restlessness, and the desperate need for affirmation. He talks about when we are lonely, we constantly seek distractions, entertainment, work, relationship, achievements, possessions, fill in the blank, whatever you do. These temporarily ease the pain, but cannot satisfy the deeper longing. And here is, I think, what he says, which is really confronting. Loneliness often drives us to use other people rather than to love them. We seek relationships to fill our emptiness rather than to give ourselves freely. Years ago, I read a study, and it was about young adults, and they wanted to see how they'd fare going if they were alone with no technology in a room, just in their own presence, what would happen to them. So they sent these young adults who'd signed up to do this, stay for a few days alone, just with your own company. None of them survived the length of time that they were supposed to be alone. And some of them became so upset and dysregulated and probably unhinged that the psychologists had to come and pull them out of the experiment. They were left weeping. Almost all of the people just ended up crying. This is how we are when we're alone. This is what we are covering. With all our distractions, with all our social media, with all our binge-watching Netflix, whatever it is, our busyness, we are pushing down this deep well of pain and sorrow. Kind of terrifying. I don't know what would happen to me. I know when I was a young adult one day, when we still had landlines, I called all my friends and no one answered. And I remember getting quite frantic, this kind of fear. Oh, what's going to happen to me today? I'm going to have to be alone. But here we are. We're hiding this from ourselves. We hide it from others. So what is the solution? Well, loneliness is emptiness. In contrast, solitude is fullness. Solitude is not withdrawing from life, but becoming centred enough that we no longer need constant reassurance from others. In solitude, we discover that identity comes from God. And you'll know, if you know the stories in the Bible, that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray by himself. And then the solitude enabled him to return to people with compassion rather than neediness. So how do we do solitude and not just end up consumed by our own loneliness and our fears? There's a practice in contemplative spirituality, which is the kind of way of connecting with God that's just quite quiet. And it's a practice of imagining yourself in the loving gaze of God. And you sit and you just imagine yourself again and again as in the loving gaze of God, remembering that you are a beloved child of God. Now, when you first start doing that, your mind will wander. I heard this beautiful thing. Every time our mind returns to remembering we're a beloved child of God, is another opportunity for God to welcome us home. Nothing we need to beat ourselves up about, but a beautiful opportunity to remember that we are a beloved child of God. And this is the first step. Henri Nouwen says, we need to learn to be alone and to see ourselves the way God sees us, so we're not acting out of neediness. And then he talks about the next thing we need to do is move from hostility to hospitality. Our culture teaches us to be fearful of strangers right from the word go, from when we are tiny children. We are to be cautious, looking or talking to strangers. I'm pretty sure in the supermarket, if those mothers knew that their children were grinning at me, they might be told, don't be silly, look away. This is how we are raised. And so we fear strangers, we fear people who are different, and then fear naturally produces hostility. And that can operate in our lives in quite subtle ways. We can be suspicious, defensive, we have a superiority complex, we're better than the people we don't know, or we can withdraw whenever there are people that might be strangers. And what does God do in the midst of this? He sends his disciples out. Go and meet strangers. And the answer is offering hospitality. We want to move away from being a hostile person. Here is the answer. But, and this is how they're all connected, hospitality requires interior space. It begins long before someone knocks on the door. If our hearts are crowded with anxiety, busyness, the need to control, a fear of difference, there is no room for another person. And this bit here I find super profound. Matthew's cup of cold water isn't difficult because water is expensive. It's difficult because genuine attention is expensive. Hospitality begins with availability. I grew up in a minister's family house, and we lived for a long time next to the church. And when you live next to the church, which I have never done in this role because I knew of the perils, people come constantly and knock on your door, usually wanting the church key because they've left theirs at home. And maybe it creates a pattern. Everyone knows you don't have to bring your key. I have a friend, and he's much kinder than I am. He was a vicar, and he said one morning at 4 o'clock in the morning there was a pounding on the door, and he thought something terrible must have happened. And so he went downstairs, and the person said, I forgot my key. I'm running an event. I need you to open the church. And as I said, he is kinder than I am, and he said yes. I wouldn't have even got out of bed. But anyway, I was thinking about this because someone was telling me they had lived next to a church, and they were saying it was really annoying. People came past all the time knocking on the door. And one time, someone came and they asked for a cup of water. And this was outrageous. And then I suddenly remembered this passage. Isn't this what we're supposed to do? Allow people to interrupt us, offer them a cup of water. Why is it so hard to be interrupted? What on earth are we being interrupted for? Okay, 4 o'clock in the morning, that's too hard. But the rest of the time, why is it so tricky? And so Henri Nouwen takes it back to that first point. We're lonely, we're distracting ourselves, we're living in this highly anxious, fearful world. And then the final part of this cycle is moving from illusion to prayer. He comments, many of us live in illusion. We create false images of ourselves, of God, and of reality. And prayer gradually dismantles these illusions. For ourselves, we often define ourselves through our success or through our failure, through our reputation, through our productivity, through our intelligence, but they're all unstable identities. We might succeed one day, we might fail the next. We might get a, award one day and then lose the next. This isn't how we should define ourselves and our identity. In prayer, we discover our true identity as beloved children of God. It all comes back to this. Who are we? Who are we really? Are we this weeping mess when we are left by ourselves? Or do we know to the very core of our being that who we are is someone made in the image of God and loved? And lastly, illusions about God. We can imagine that God's demanding, controlling, distant, primarily interested just in judging us. But in prayer, when we can encounter God, we discover something quite different. God is loving. God is patient. God is present. God is always inviting us into a relationship with him. And here is this opportunity for transformation. We encounter God, we learn to know God, this incredibly loving, patient presence, and we are transformed into God's likeness. And then we go into the world, looking like, smelling like, feeling like God, because God is loving and patient and present. And here is the work. Yes, we are given this identity. It's sitting waiting for us. But I think it's sort of like a jacket. Have we bothered to put it on? Do we bother to put it on every day? Are we engaged in the process of putting on this identity that we are given, of dismantling the illusions we have about ourselves? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to have a time of solitude. Not a hugely long one, but one hopefully long enough that you can calm your thinking and imagine yourself in the loving gaze of God. So I'm going to pray in a minute. I'm going to invite you into that space. I'm going to ask you to do this thing because I can see from the front. If you've got your phone out, put your phone away and just enter into this space of solitude. Let's pray together. God, here we see that your followers reflected you in the world, and that's what we're called to do too, but we acknowledge that that seems like a step too far. But why it might be hard is because we have not spent time enough with you to begin to reflect your goodness, your patience and your love in our own lives and to the lives of those around us. Jesus, we confess that we are busy, we are anxious, we are full of fear. God, who knows what would happen if we spent too much time alone? What would we find? But God, in this quietness, I pray we would find you and we would hear your voice reminding us that we are your beloved children. You see us, you know us, you love us. God, I invite you, come and meet us this morning. We give this time to you. Be gracious to us. In this moment of solitude, may we not find ourselves, may we find you.